The volcanic ash crunched beneath Japanese boots like shattered glass. Mount Suribachi loomed dark against the Pacific dawn. Through the pre-dawn gloom, enemy aircraft sat in neat rows on captured runways below. American P-51 Mustangs gleamed silver in the weak light. Distant engines rumbled from Saipan. B-29 superfortresses warming up for another mission. The sound had become constant background noise. Today felt different, though. Today, those foreign fighters would fly all the way to Japan proper. A Japanese officer squinted through flight goggles. Unease twisted in his stomach. The Americans had seized this strategic rock after 36 days of hell. Now they were turning Japan's outer defense ring into their own launching pad. Intelligence reports called these very long-range missions. Within weeks, these sleek fighters would destroy Japan's aerial defenses. Over 400 Japanese aircraft would fall in just 2 months. The story begins not with aerial combat. It starts with complete misunderstanding of American industrial thinking. Japanese aviators had ruled Pacific skies for 3 years. Their legendary A6M-0 fighters danced through air like deadly butterflies. Perfect engineering for maneuverability and range, the Zero embodied Japanese aesthetic principles. Elegant simplicity in every line. Lightweight aluminum stretched over minimal framework. Every unnecessary ounce stripped away for maximum agility. This philosophy had proven devastatingly effective in early war years. At Pearl Harbor, the Zeros carved through opposition. Over the Philippines, they dominated completely. Throughout the Dutch East Indies, they seemed supernatural. Japanese pilots turned inside any fighter that challenged them. But 1945 brought fundamental changes to warfare's character. The vast Pacific distances became America's greatest strategic challenge. Victory required sustained operations across thousands of miles of open ocean. This demanded unprecedented industrial capacity, technological sophistication beyond anything seen before. The P-51 Mustang represented culmination of American wartime engineering. British aerodynamic theory merged with American manufacturing might. 3 years of global combat lessons shaped every detail. Japanese intelligence first reported these new American fighters. Veteran pilots reacted with dismissive laughter. Petty Officer Saburo Sakai already had 64 confirmed kills. He later recalled initial assessments with bitter irony. Intelligence photographs showed another heavy lumbering machine. Americans valued brute force over finesse. The reasoning seemed perfectly sound from Japanese perspective. Previous American fighters emphasized weight, armor, and firepower, all attributes that cost maneuverability. Japanese pilots considered maneuverability essential to air combat supremacy. This contempt reflected deeper cultural assumptions about warfare itself. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spiritual elements of combat. Superior training, discipline, and fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantages. Zero pilots were warriors in the samurai tradition. Years of training achieved perfect harmony between pilot, aircraft, and mission. Countless hours learning to extract every possible advantage from their machines, fighting and winning through superior skill rather than superior equipment. First encounters between Zeros and Mustangs seemed to confirm Japanese expectations. Late 1944 brought isolated skirmishes over the Marianas and Philippines. Experienced Zero pilots still held their own. Superior knowledge of aircraft capabilities proved crucial. They avoided Mustang high-speed attacks, drew American pilots into turning fights where Zero maneuverability dominated. Flight Warrant Officer Yasuhiko Kuroe tested a captured P-51. His report seemed reassuring to Japanese commanders. The American fighter had excellent equipment and good speed characteristics. but its turning radius at combat speeds was inferior. A properly handled Zero should maintain tactical advantage in close combat. Even these early encounters contained ominous signs for trained observers. American pilots no longer engaged in individual combat. They fought in coordinated pairs and flights. Radio communication enabled disciplined tactics. Numerical advantages at point of contact became standard. More troubling still, Americans showed no inclination for turning fights. They used speed advantage to control engagement terms, diving in for quick attacks, then climbing away. Japanese pilots couldn't bring superior maneuverability to bear. The true scope of challenge became apparent when Americans secured Iwo Jima. This sulfurous volcanic rock sat strategically between Marianas and Japan proper. Overnight, it transformed from defensive outpost to world's most advanced forward operating base. American engineers extended runways within days. Fuel systems and complex infrastructure supported long-range fighter operations. Hundreds of P-51 Mustangs arriving on Iwo Jima sent shockwaves through Tokyo Command Headquarters. For the first time, American fighters possessed both range and performance. They could escort bombers all the way to Japanese targets. They could dominate any aerial opposition encountered. The mathematics were stark and unforgiving. From Iwo Jima, a P-51 could fly 1,500 miles on internal fuel alone, enough to reach any target in Japanese home islands and return safely. External drop tanks extended range even further. American fighters could loiter over targets engaging in prolonged combat. April 7, 1945, marked the beginning of the end. That spring morning, 108 P-51D Mustangs took off from Iwo Jima's steel matting runways. They climbed into formation for rendezvous with 107 B-29 Superfortresses. Target was Nakajima Aircraft Factory near Tokyo. Japanese fighter pilots scrambling to intercept this formation must have felt magnificent terror. A stream of silver aircraft stretched across Pacific sky. Fighters protected them that could match any aircraft in Japanese inventory. Speed and altitude performance were equal or superior. Japanese response represented everything remaining of their once mighty fighter force. Approximately 110 to 125 fighters rose to challenge the American formation. Veteran pilots flew last airworthy Zeros. Newer aircraft like Kai-84 Hayate and J-2M Raiden carried barely trained replacements. Replacement pilots had fewer than 50 hours combat experience. Disparity in pilot quality had become perhaps the most critical factor. American pilots arriving in Pacific by 1945 typically had over 300 hours flight training. Advanced instruction included gunnery, formation flying, and radio communication. Japanese counterparts were victims of accelerated training programs. Catastrophic losses necessitated speed over thoroughness. They often arrived at operational squadrons with barely enough experience for routine flight conditions. The battle over Tokyo that April morning shattered remaining illusions about Japanese aerial capability. Major James B. Tapp led a flight of 15th Fighter Group Mustangs. His description was clinical in precision. They came at us in ones and twos just like always. No coordination, no mutual support. We broke into standard defensive weave and picked them off systematically. Captain Robert W. Moore's account was even more direct. He got 2 kills within 45 seconds. Enemy fighters were flying straight and level. Apparently, unaware Americans were closing until too late. The tactical revolution extended far beyond individual pilot skill. American fighters carried sophisticated radio communication systems. Unprecedented coordination between aircraft and ground controllers became possible. The ANARA-8 homing radio, nicknamed Uncle Dog by American pilots, provided precise navigation assistance. Multiple radio channels enabled complex tactical maneuvers impossible for earlier generation fighters. Japanese aircraft either lacked radio equipment entirely or carried crude, unreliable systems. These frequently failed under combat conditions. Most significantly, American pilots had developed tactical doctrines specifically designed to neutralize Japanese advantages while maximizing their own. Hit-and-run tactics characterized American fighter operations in 1945. This represented complete philosophical shift from individual combat dominating earlier air warfare. Rather than seeking single combat with individual opponents, Americans fought as teams. Speed and altitude controlled engagement parameters. Coordinated attacks overwhelmed defensive reactions. Lieutenant E.L. Bright's description of that first Tokyo raid captured the one-sided nature of encounters. He saw about 50 fighters. The ones he saw were sitting ducks. You just drove up behind them and pulled the trigger. This was not merely superior technology in action. It resulted from systematic tactical evolution based on 3 years of hard-learned combat experience. American training programs had analyzed thousands of combat reports. They identified specific techniques most likely to produce victory against Japanese aircraft and pilots. Results of that first escort mission sent shockwaves through Japanese military leadership. American fighters and bombers together claimed 71 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 30 more probably destroyed, and 44 damaged. Against this, Americans lost only 2 P-51s. Sergeant Birdo Hansen viewed the battle from B-29 gunner position. His description was vivid. Mustangs were knocking Japs down all over the sky. For a while during the fight, Japs were parachuting down all around us. He would never forget it. These statistics represented more than tactical victory. They announced arrival of new era in Pacific air warfare. Japanese commanders had grown accustomed to fighting defensive war with gradually diminishing resources. Daily raids by hundreds of long-range American fighters represented strategic catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. Careful husbanding of aircraft and fuel had characterized Japanese operations since 1943. This suddenly became meaningless facing American industrial production. They could replace losses faster than they could be inflicted. In weeks following that first escort mission, the pattern became predictable and devastating. American fighters returned to Japanese airspace repeatedly, sometimes escorting B-29 formations, but increasingly conducting independent fighter sweeps. These operations were designed specifically to destroy Japanese aircraft wherever they could be found. This represented evolution of American air doctrine, from defensive escort missions to offensive counter-air campaigns, seeking to destroy enemy air capability at its source rather than simply defending against attacks. Psychological impact on Japanese pilots proved as destructive as physical losses. Veterans like Saburo Sakai later described profound disorientation. They had trained entire careers to fight individual combat. Pilot against pilot, machine against machine. But Americans didn't fight that way. They fought like a machine themselves, coordinated and relentless. You might outmaneuver one only to find 2 more diving from different angles. Flight Lieutenant Yohei Hinoki was among first Japanese pilots to shoot down a P-51 in late 1943. He experienced first-hand evolution of American capability when encountering new fighters over Japan in 1945. His description of flying captured P-51 Evelina at Japanese Test Center provided crucial insight. He was impressed by the armor seat. His artificial leg had no trouble with rudder pedal. Bulletproof glass had better transparency than thin Japanese glass. The seat was surrounded by thick steel plate. He had never seen this in a fighter before. Overall, it was better equipped than any Japanese airplane he had ever seen. This observation highlighted fundamental differences between Japanese and American aircraft design philosophy. Japanese engineers stripped away every possible ounce of weight to maximize performance. American designers added protection, equipment, and capability, even at cost of some theoretical performance advantage. The result was aircraft that could not just perform, but survive. Pilots could return to fight again, rather than being lost to wounds that better protection might have prevented. Mechanical reliability that Japanese test pilots noted in captured American aircraft proved equally significant in sustained operations. Japanese engines of 1945 were notorious for oil leaks. Mechanical failures and reduced power output due to inferior metallurgy and fuel quality were common. American fighters, by contrast, were powered by Packard-built Merlin engines. These represented finest achievements of mass production engineering, capable of reliable operation under combat conditions while maintaining full power output throughout operational life. As American fighter sweeps intensified throughout spring and summer 1945, Japanese losses mounted with mathematical precision. Mission after mission returned, with claims of dozens of enemy aircraft destroyed. American losses remained minimal. April 19th and 22nd raids proved particularly devastating. American fighters claimed 32 Japanese aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, plus 30 destroyed and 70 damaged by strafing attacks on airfields. P-51s achieved complete tactical surprise during these attacks. Initial wave over Kanoya Airfield actually received green light from Control Tower. Clearance to land as they approached at high speed for strafing runs. Symbolic power of this moment cannot be overstated. Japanese air traffic controllers, trained to recognize distinctive silhouettes of friendly aircraft, had become accustomed to absence of their own fighters. They mistook attacking Americans for returning friends. This represented not just tactical failure, but complete collapse of situational awareness, characterizing Japanese air defense by mid-1945. Throughout these operations, one recurring symbol appeared in American pilot accounts. Abundance of supplies characterized their operations. Japanese pilots struggled with fuel shortages, inferior lubricants, and ammunition rationing. American counterparts operated with logistical lavishness that seemed almost supernatural. P-51s returned from 7-hour missions with fuel to spare. Pilots who expended ammunition in combat could expect immediate resupply for next day's operations. Damaged aircraft were quickly repaired or replaced entirely. Japanese workshops struggled to cannibalize parts from wrecked aircraft to keep others airworthy. This material abundance reflected not just American industrial capacity, but fundamental philosophical difference in how two nations approached sustained warfare challenge. Japanese military culture, rooted in traditions of austerity and spiritual discipline, viewed material limitations as challenges. Superior training and fighting spirit could overcome them. American military doctrine, by contrast, treated logistics as foundation of all successful operations. Enormous resources invested in supply systems designed to ensure combat units never lacked anything needed to complete missions. Major James Tapp's achievement of 3 kills on first Tokyo raid exemplified systematic approach to aerial warfare. Rather than relying solely on individual skill and determination, Tapp and fellow pilots benefited from months of specialized training. Long-range escort procedures, standardized tactical formations, and coordinated attack techniques were drilled repeatedly. Their radios allowed real-time communication and mutual support impossible for earlier generation fighters. Their aircraft carried not just superior firepower, but sophisticated gun sights. These increased hit probability and reduced ammunition consumption. June 1st disaster over Pacific provided perhaps most vivid illustration of environmental challenges American forces had learned to overcome through superior equipment and procedures. When 148 P-51s encountered unexpected thunderstorm front en route to Osaka, 27 aircraft were lost to weather-related causes. Collisions, icing, and loss of control in severe turbulence claimed them. 24 pilots died in this single incident, representing costliest weather-related loss in Pacific air operations history. Yet even this tragedy demonstrated American systematic approach to operational challenges. Within hours of disaster, 7th Fighter Command initiated comprehensive reviews. Weather forecasting procedures, navigation systems, and formation techniques all came under scrutiny. New protocols were developed for dealing with unexpected weather. Standardized procedures for formation breakup and individual navigation in emergency conditions were established. Sophisticated air-sea rescue network established along standard mission routes immediately mobilized. Search for survivors demonstrated depth of planning, characterizing American operations. By contrast, Japanese forces lacked both equipment and institutional capacity to conduct similar systematic improvements. Weather forecasting remained primitive. Navigation equipment was inadequate for precision flying in adverse conditions. Rescue capabilities were virtually non-existent for pilots forced down over water. Result was that Japanese losses to non-combat causes often exceeded combat losses. This created steady degradation of capability that no amount of individual heroism could overcome. As summer 1945 progressed, pattern of Japanese aerial defeat became increasingly predictable. American fighter sweeps encountered diminishing opposition, not because Japanese resolve had weakened, but because Japanese capability had been systematically destroyed. Mission reports from this period describe attacks on airfields where American pilots found mostly dummy aircraft. Extensive camouflage efforts and widely dispersed planes drained of fuel to prevent fires when strafed. Desperate measures employed by Japanese forces in final months revealed complete collapse of air defense system. Pilots attacking Tokyo area airfields encountered barrage balloons. Kites designed to tangle propellers appeared at various locations. Landmines triggered by low-flying aircraft were planted near runways. Even cables stretched across runways to down attacking aircraft. At Tokorozawa Airfield, Japanese defenders erected 50-foot high cable barrier. Last-ditch attempt to down American fighters during strafing runs. These improvised defenses represented not tactical innovation, but final expedients of force that had exhausted conventional means of resistance. Human cost of systematic destruction extended far beyond mere statistics. Japanese pilots who had trained for years to achieve mastery of their craft found themselves facing opponents whose superiority stemmed not from individual skill. Systematic advantages in equipment, training, logistics, and tactical doctrine proved decisive. Veterans like Saburo Sakai had survived 3 years of Pacific combat. They discovered their accumulated expertise had become largely irrelevant, facing American technological and industrial supremacy. Captain Robert Moore's description of achieving 2 kills within 45 seconds during first Tokyo raid captured impersonal efficiency. This characterizing American aerial operations by 1945. This was not individual combat between warriors, but industrial warfare. Superior systems systematically destroyed inferior ones. Romance of aerial combat characterizing earlier war phases gave way to more mechanical process. American pilots applied standardized techniques to achieve predictable results. Yet even as Japanese air power collapsed under American pressure, individual acts of courage and skill continued. They demonstrated quality of Japanese pilots when circumstances permitted. Few encounters where experienced Japanese aviators managed to engage American fighters on favorable terms still resulted in significant American losses. This proved pilot quality remained a crucial factor when other variables were equalized. These isolated successes, however, could not alter fundamental strategic reality Japan faced. An opponent with virtually unlimited industrial capacity conducting sustained operations beyond Japanese ability to counter. Testimony of Japanese test pilot Yasuhiko Kuroe. After extensive evaluation of captured P-51, Evelina provided perhaps most honest assessment. He had such confidence with P-51 that he feared no Japanese fighters. This statement from 30 Victory Ace represented more than professional admiration. It was recognition that American aircraft design had achieved level of overall capability Japanese industry could not match. Existing resources and manufacturing capacity simply couldn't compete. Systematic nature of American operations became evident in careful establishment of navigation aids. Rescue services and communication networks supported long-range fighter missions. Uncle Dog homing system utilized modified B-29s as navigation beacons. P-51 formations could rendezvous precisely with bomber streams over vast ocean distances. Extensive air-sea rescue network featured surface submarines. Specialized rescue aircraft and amphibious vehicles provided pilot recovery capabilities. These significantly reduced personnel losses from operational accidents and combat damage. Support systems reflected understanding of warfare as comprehensive undertaking, requiring not just combat capability, but entire infrastructure necessary to sustain operations indefinitely. Japanese forces constrained by limited resources and increasingly desperate strategic circumstances could not develop comparable systems, even when they understood their necessity. Result was that American operations became more effective and sustainable over time. Japanese capability steadily degraded under cumulative effects of losses, mechanical failures, and resource shortages. Final VLR mission flown on August 14, 1945, was last day of war. Massive four-group effort demonstrated scale of American air power deployed against Japan by war's end. Over 400 P-51s participated in this final operation. More fighters than Japanese had managed to assemble for any single engagement since early 1944. This quantitative disparity reflected not just industrial production, but fundamental differences. How two nations approached challenge of sustained warfare differed completely. In retrospect, destruction of Japanese air power during those two critical months of spring 1945 represented more than tactical victory. It demonstrated triumph of systematic industrial warfare over traditional military virtues. Individual skill and spiritual determination proved inadequate. American success stemmed not from superior courage or flying ability. Patient development of technological, tactical, and logistical systems rendered traditional concepts of aerial combat obsolete. P-51 Mustangs served as perfect symbol of this transformation. 6 50-caliber machine guns represented not just firepower, but precision manufacturing. Thousands of identical weapons with identical performance characteristics could be produced. Packard Merlin engine embodied not just power, but systematic application of metallurgical science. Unprecedented reliability was achieved through scientific methods. Radio equipment enabled not just communication, but coordination. This transformed individual aircraft into elements of larger tactical system. For Japanese pilots who had trained entire careers to excel in individual combat, this systematic approach represented fundamental challenge. Everything they understood about aerial fighting was being challenged. Veterans like Saburo Sakai, reflecting on wartime experiences decades later, recognized they had been defeated not by superior opponents, but by superior systems. They were still thinking of air combat as individual duels between warriors. Americans had turned it into industrial process. Human tragedy of this transformation extended beyond hundreds of Japanese pilots lost during critical months. It encompassed destruction of entire martial tradition defining Japanese military aviation since inception. Careful cultivation of individual skill had produced aces like Sakai, Nishizawa, and dozens of others. This became irrelevant facing American mass production techniques. They could train adequate pilots faster than Japan could train exceptional ones. Yet, story of Japanese pilots' encounter with American P-51 Mustangs over their homeland in 1945 represents more than military defeat. It marked transition from warfare as individual contest to warfare as industrial undertaking. Mockery that greeted early intelligence reports about American fighter capability gave way to respectful recognition. Systematic superiority could not be overcome through traditional means. 400 Japanese aircraft lost during those 2 months represented not just tactical defeat, but end of era. Individual warrior virtues could no longer triumph over material disadvantage. In the end, silver Mustangs that swept Japanese skies in spring 1945 served as harbingers of new age. Victory would belong not to most skilled or determined combatants, but to nations capable of sustaining complex industrial and technological systems modern warfare demanded. Zero had been perfect expression of Japanese aesthetic and tactical values. Elegant, efficient, and deadly in hands of master pilot. Mustang represented something different entirely. Systematic application of industrial capacity to challenge of aerial warfare. This resulted in capability that rendered individual mastery irrelevant. Final irony of this transformation lay in fact that both aircraft succeeded brilliantly at what they were designed to accomplish. Zero had given Japan tactical air superiority when tactical air superiority was sufficient. Mustang provided America with capability to conduct sustained operations over unlimited distances, when such capability had become foundation of strategic success. Neither aircraft was inherently superior to the other. Each perfectly embodied strategic requirements and industrial capabilities of nation that produced it. But by 1945, strategic requirements of Pacific warfare had evolved beyond Japanese industrial capacity to meet them. American industrial capacity had finally matched strategic requirements that victory demanded. Result was not triumph of individual machines or pilots. It was victory of systematic approach to warfare that would define military operations for remainder of 20th century and beyond. In this context, P-51 Mustang served not just as weapon, but as symbol. Industrial democracy had learned to mobilize full resources in service of strategic objectives. Individual heroism alone could never achieve such objectives. The volcanic ash still crunched beneath boots on Mount Suribachi. But now those boots belonged to American mechanics servicing the very aircraft that would complete Japan's aerial defeat. The transformation was complete.